Sue Black, thank you so much for joining us on Scotland Tonight.
You're welcome.
The first time you dissected a human body, you said it was life-changing. Why this fascination with what lies beneath the skin?
We spend our entire lives interacting with people, looking at them from the outside, so that every interaction we have with someone is to the surface that you see. And there's so much more of the person that you can't see. So when you lift the skin and you look inside, what's in there is absolutely and utterly amazing. Some people think it must be horrendous, that it must repel them, it must be something disgusting or scary. But it isn't. The way in which the human body's put together and the myriad of millions of cells that all work together and generally work in harmony to make us survive and to cope day on day is nothing short of a miracle every single second. So I want to know you from the outside, but I want to know you from the inside as well.
I mean, you're surrounded by death, you know, throughout your life, what you do in your job, dead bodies. It holds no fears for you, obviously.
No, and why should it? Because it's going to happen. It might be a once-in-a-lifetime experience for everyone, but it is going to happen. And I think we've become almost distanced from death. We don't feel comfortable talking about it. We don't feel comfortable confronting that it's coming our way. And we need to, because it's going to happen. And we kind of think that it's going to happen somewhere in the future. Maybe when I'm in my 80s or I'm in my 90s. But the stark reality is it can happen in the next 5 minutes. And therefore, why would you spend time worrying about it, fearing it, when often there's very little that you can do when it comes calling your name?
Forensic anthropology isn't about how people died, it's about how they lived, isn't it?
That's right.
So it's unravelling a mystery almost.
It is. So a lot of people say to us, what's the difference between forensic anthropology and forensic pathology? And when you get past the fact that it's about a difference of 100,000 a year in salary, what the real difference is the pathologist's job is about determining the cause of death or the manner of death. They want to be able to report on that event and why it happened. Our job is that when we have that body and we don't know who they are, so you imagine a situation where a body is found in woodlands and the police need to know that was Joe Bloggs, because only when they know it was Joe Bloggs they can go and speak to Joe's parents and Joe's family and Joe's friends and start to piece together the story leading up to why their body was maybe found there and what the death was. But we can't get to that person's name until we can start to unravel information about their life. So were they male or female? How old were they when they died? How tall were they? What was their ethnic background? Did they walk with a limp? Was one tooth broken? Had they had a previous fracture? All of those things build a picture that we can release to the public to say, does anybody recognise who this might be? And when they come forward with a possible name, what we can then do is see whether the ante-mortem information matches with the post-mortem. So we're trying to get to the name always.
And you can find out details about their life from their bones, their hair, their nails, you know, tiny details.
Just about everything. Just about every part of your body tells us something about your life. It will tell us whether you dye your hair or not. It will tell us whether you wear high-heeled shoes a lot or not. It will tell us where you were born, where you grew up, because there are some parts of our skeleton that don't remodel. And so when those bits of bone were made, they were made from the foodstuffs that your mum was eating when she was pregnant with you. So there's a huge raft of information in there about you, which is specific to you and different to anybody else. And that's what we're trying to get to.
And as these details of the person's life emerges, do you feel a kind of connection with the body?
It's really awful when you have a body and you're desperately trying to find who it is and you just keep hitting brick walls and you can't get through to find out who that person was. And then suddenly there's a breakthrough you don't expect. And there's a huge moment of elation because you know that you've now been able to allow that body to be identified their death to be investigated, and their parents or family to know in fact what's happened to them. So we try desperately hard to be these very clinical and removed scientists, but every now and again we just have to acknowledge we're human as well.
You were the lead anthropologist going out to Kosovo for the war crimes investigation, and that was the first time you'd kind of worked abroad in a situation like that. Did you find it really overwhelming?
It was very unusual because it was not only the environment in which we were working, because it was still a war zone at that point. It was very hot and difficult conditions. You had families that were still grieving around you as well, and just the mass scale of the whole operation. And I don't think when I went out I knew what I was really going out there to do, but it was a very quick wake-up call that said, my goodness me, this is a steep learning curve. We need to make that learning, and we need to be able to pass it on. And certainly for us within the UK, it was the start of a real learning process within the UK for that discipline.
And what was the biggest challenge then in those?
I think in many ways the biggest challenge was the fact that we were working for an international criminal court. So you were working to your own UK standards with your eye constantly on the fact that your evidence was going into the International Criminal Court against Milosevic or Mladic or Karadzic, whoever it may be. And you often didn't have the kind of equipment that you would normally have at home or the conditions you would have at home. So you're trying to do the best you possibly can for evidence, knowing it's going to an international court. But you know, you might be working, for example, my mortuary table on the first scene we were at were 2 planks of wood that were balanced between the back of a tractor and the back of a well. And so those are the kind of conditions you're working in, but you can't afford to let your standards drop. And I think that was always the driving force and the push behind us.
You were one of the first forensic scientists that went out in the aftermath of the tsunami in 2004. And in the book, you described some of the scenes like Dante's hell. That must have been awful.
It was awful. We were in a situation where thousands of individuals had lost their lives. There was no warning that this was going to come. This wasn't a war zone. This was a natural disaster. So people were caught on holiday at Christmas time, enjoying themselves. The problem was that because the wave came in when it did and then went out, you ended up with bodies strewn everywhere. And in an effort to try and help, what people were doing were picking up bodies, putting them into the back of flatbed trucks and taking them to the temples. So the temples had piles and piles and piles of corpses because nobody knew what else to do with them. Now that isn't a criticism of the country because they were completely and utterly caught unprepared and unaware. And you think, well, what do we do? And what they did was they laid all the bodies out in rows upon rows in the forecourts of the temples. And you're in such incredible heat that the bodies are decomposing in front of you. And families are coming in trying to find the person that they're looking for. And they're walking down these rows of decomposing, bloated corpses trying to find their son or their daughter. You have maggots everywhere, you have flies everywhere, you have rats everywhere. And so there almost isn't a worse place if you can imagine what you hear, which is the grief, what you smell, which is the decomposition that is so thick you taste it, what you see and what you touch. Every single sense you have as a human is assaulted.
Does that not haunt you?
No, because our job is to do a job. And so you have to find in your head a clinical compartment that you can go into. And you say, I didn't cause this, I'm not responsible for it, I don't have the guilt of it, but I'm needed. And my job is to go in here, to find the evidence, to convey the evidence, and to allow others to either agree or disagree, but hopefully agree so a body can be released, or in a criminal aspect, for the jury and the courtroom to make its decision. So you try to take yourself out of the immediate environment you're in and cope with it inside your own head. It's very dangerous. And there are a lot of our colleagues who end up with trauma-related stress. And nobody ever says, it's not going to happen to me. If you do that, you're a fool, because you don't know whether it's a smell or a sight or a sound or something that will trigger it. And it's right the way through every single day, every event, you are actively trying to protect yourself from allowing your professional world to bleed into your personal world.
You seem so motivated by what you do and your job. Does that kind of protect you as well in a way, because what you're doing is so important?
It is incredibly important, because if you imagine, one of the worst things that could happen is a family member goes missing and you don't know what's happened to them. So Renee McRae's sister, Moira Anderson's family, they don't have that missing person, and their life goes into a stutter because they don't know what's happened to them. They're waiting for the worst. They're always fearing the worst because they don't know. Our job is to try and help bring some of that closure. So you can't help but not be motivated, where at the end of the day you think there are people who are in what I would consider to be the worst possible place. Anything, God forbid, ever happened to my girls or my husband and I didn't know where they were, that to me would be absolute mental hell on earth.
You're leaving Dundee later in the year to go to Lancaster.
I am.
Are you looking forward to heading down south? I know you're not going to be living there permanently.
No. I'm born in Inverness, brought up in West Coast, and so my feet are heading south, but my head and my heart are up here, and it's easy enough for my feet to turn round again and come north. And if I stand on my tiptoes, I can almost see Hadrian's Wall, so I think I'm okay. But they offered me an opportunity to go down and set the strategy for engagement within the university, and I just couldn't turn that down.
Obviously, people that leave their bodies to science, providing an incredible public service. Are you going to leave your body to science?
So really interesting. So until I'm about 65, I've got my organ donor card, and my rationale on that is the organs are probably of some use to someone. I'd rather help somebody live a little bit longer. Beyond 65, I've probably abused everything to such an extent that it's no good for anything else. And so I bequeath my remains, hopefully to this department, into Dundee. And I will be a cadaver. When I grow up, I want to be a cadaver. And then when they've finished dissecting me, what I want them to do is I want to collect the bones, and I want them to boil the bones down, and then I want them to reconstruct them into the skeleton so that I can hang in my dissecting room and teach forever.
Wow.
As you do.
You're going to live forever then,
I'm going to teach forever. I'm going to be the bane of every student's life forever.